Every 3 years we produce a strategic plan, and that is what we're consulting about at the moment. It's looking 3 years ahead, it's trying to balance all the things that we ought to be doing over that period. This will feed in to an annual plan which will come out later in the year, which directly relates to what we're going to do in the immediate term. But this is to give the professions an opportunity to comment on our general direction, where we're going, what we're trying to do. So that's the context of all of this. And the point about this is that having an effective regulator is very much in the interests of all of the dental professions. And I think that, and the reason for that is that they want the public, the professions will want the public to have confidence in them. They will want people to feel that when they visit a dental practice, whoever they see, whichever profession, has been properly regulated, is properly trained, and that there are means of dealing with an individual who perhaps doesn't meet those standards. So that's why good regulation is important. And we want to make sure that we're regulating in a way that the profession not only understands, but has had the opportunity to feed in to the emphasis that we will be placing on our work over the next 3 years. Well, what we're planning to do later this year is to consult separately from the strategic plan on some of the issues about scope of practice, about what should or should not be included, about how you look at professionalism. What we probably ought to be doing, and this is a long-term objective, is moving towards a situation where we recognise that the professions, they're called professions for a reason. They've been through a process to have the professional qualification. Therefore, they should have the opportunity of exercising their professional judgment. And the key question is, are they delivering the services that they're supposed to deliver in a way which benefits the patient and the public? And that's the judgment should be made. Now, that's a very different way of working, and it's not something that could be introduced over like that, but it's something that we want to look at and to explore with the professions how that might work, what it would look like, and whether that's something they would like to see happen. Well, at the moment, we're quite hidebound by the minutiae of the legislative framework, and the government is actually going to loosen some, or at least make it possible to make changes. But the basic principle is we need to be satisfied that an individual from overseas who's applying to be a registrant meets the standards that we would expect from a registrant in this country. So hence we have the overseas registrant exam, and that's in 2 parts, including the written part and then the practical part. Now, there have been some issues in the last 2 years because of COVID about the physical mechanics of delivering the practical part of the examination. I hope we're working our way through that, but we'd like more flexibility as to how all of that's done. The government's also looking at powers which would enable us, under certain circumstances, to recognise certain overseas qualifications. But we've got to decide, and this again we would want to talk to the professionals about, is how do we make that judgment? Because a professional qualification in dentistry from one country or from one overseas institution may be very different from that in another country or what we're used to in this country. Well, part of our role is in relation to the dental schools and the other routes to qualification, and we want to make sure that not only are all those standards being met as part of that process, but also at the point of qualification that those professionals who are coming out into the field as dentists are in fact ready to practice, that they have reached those standards, and that may mean that there needs to be support structures around them, and that's one of the things that we will be exploring with the dental schools and the dental education providers. Well, I think it's a statement that any organisation ought to be saying about itself, that we will continue to make sure that we're operating efficiently and effectively and so on. So it's a statement that we are going to do that. We're not just going, oh, it's all perfect. We are looking at that all the time. But don't forget, we are very accountable. I mean, we're a body, public body accountable to Parliament. We've got the PSA who oversees the work that we do, like it does with all the other regulators. They hold us to account. They produce a report every year on what we're doing. They look at the details of some of the things that we do and how we do them. That's all part of the process. But we are, we have to account for the public resources that are used, which is essentially the registrant's fees. We have to make sure that we're using that resource effectively, efficiently and appropriately, and that's something we will always do. We're currently revising our EDI strategy, and a further iteration of that will come to the Council, I think, in September. But there are two elements that we need to look at. First of all is the way in which the organisation itself functions internally, and so the people in this building, the people in Commonwealth Square in Birmingham and so on, whether that is all meeting what would be required, what would be expected in terms of EDI standards. And then there's the question of how we engage with the outside world. So how do we engage with the professions? How do we engage with those who have been reported fitness to practice? How do we engage with those who come to us with concerns? So those are all different aspects of it. What we've asked the teams here to do is to look at the processes that they put in place under the old strategy and to see how those should be taken forward in the future and how those might be modified. So they're clearly focused on what's going to make a difference and ensure that we are operating to the standards that people would expect. Well, we're not quoting figures yet. That will only be decided when we do the plan for next year, which will be later in the year. So this is the strategic plan, which then feeds into that. But equally, there's no point in consulting about a strategic plan unless we've given some indication of where we are. So the general approach that we're taking is that we would not want to see the registration fees rising in real terms. They've been held in cash terms for several years. That's not going, it is very unlikely that that could be done in the future given current rates of inflation. So the sort of commitment that we're talking about is that we will try and make sure that any increase is below the rate of inflation. But that's still speculative. We're going to do a lot of work on trying to hold down costs. We're going to try and maintain that position. We're not going to do, particularly whilst inflation is at its current rate and potentially quite volatile, is say, well, we're going to decide this year what the fee is going to be for each of the next 3 years, because that it is a recipe potentially for disaster. Or the only way we could do that is, well, if we put the fee up by a really large amount so that we can cover everything that might happen in the next 2 or 3 years. The intention is to recognise, unfortunately, the fee may well have to rise in each of the years, but that we are making a general commitment that this will not, that we will, other things being, the world could end, other things being equal, that we won't increase by more than the general level of inflation, and throughout that time we will continue to bear down on our own internal costs. Well, it's not really a question. I mean, again, that's not for us. What we have to do is we have a particular statutory responsibility to meet. We start from the basis of we need to do enough to be able to satisfy, to protect the interests of public and patients. And then we're going to try and do that in the most cost-effective and efficient factor. Inevitably, dentists, all the professionals are facing huge burdens at the moment. We recognise that, which is why we're certainly not going to be trying to increase the fee by more than the absolute minimum necessary. But of course we'll listen. We'll take note of what they say, we'll consider it. Ultimately, of course, we have to make our own judgment, but that's, I would believe, is always made, you make a better judgment if you've listened to all the different views, even if that may well mean that you have to disagree with some of them, but at least you should listen and take those into account.